The webinar will begin shortly. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar entitled Move Ahead with Sustainability. Know your company's carbon footprint. My name is Shalini from the Malaysian Plastic Manufacturers Association, Mpma, and I will be your MC for today. To begin the webinar, let me run through the ethics or rules of the webinar. You will notice that we have muted or turned off video for all participants. This is to ensure there are no disruptions to the speakers during the webinar. Participants may ask or post questions related to the presentations in the chat box below during the webinar. The speakers will only answer questions that are clearly written and based on the presentations. Kindly refrain from marketing your goods or services in the chat box. Kindly also refrain from posting comments or remarks to the question posted in the chat box. The chat box is only for queries related to the presentation. The organizer reserves the right to remove participants who run afoul for the webinar etiquette. Ladies and gentlemen, the webinar today is brought to you by Mpma to highlight the importance and relevance of sustainability in today's business model and operation. To provide further insights on sustainability and the plastic industry, please join me to welcome Ms. Wee Ching Yan, Chairman of Mpma's Sustainability Subcommittee, to give her opening remarks. Ms. Wee, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shalini, and good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. S. Jayashankar, Sustainability Lead and Director of Oil and Gas, Chemicals, Energy, and Raw Materials, Martrade. Mr. Alvin Ang, Executive Director of Tongguan Industries, Berhad. Dr. Cheong Meng Soon, Research Fellow, University Technology, Malaysia. And good evening, good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to today's webinar that focuses on sustainability and how companies can embrace and move ahead with it. We hear plastic sustainability being mentioned frequently, but what is the significance to the plastic industries locally and globally? While environmental issues related to plastics such as plastics pollution and marine litter are mainly a waste management issue, we cannot deny that the extensive impact of these issues has changed the way we operate our businesses. By now, all of us know that various approaches and solutions has been suggested by many parties, such as incorporating recycled content into our plastic products, switching to alternative materials. These are being proposed by numerous parties to mitigate plastics pollution. While these solutions may address plastics pollution from the waste management aspect, one aspect overarching all of this is the climate change. The carbon footprint of materials and processes is an important determinant of greenhouse gas emission, which effects on climate change are long-term and might be irreversible if we do not act fast enough. Studies have shown that plastics has the lowest carbon footprint compared to many alternative materials. Therefore, the plastic industries should build on this as a differentiation to differentiate ourselves from the competitive material producers. With sustainability and environmental compliance, certification, monitoring, and reporting all slowly being incorporated into the business value chain, not just locally, but globally. Malaysian Plastics Manufacturers Association wishes to assist all of our members on this journey through today's webinar. I hope the webinar today will inspire us to start managing our business carbon footprint and embark on the journey of business sustainability. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. V, for the opening remarks. We hope it gears up all the participants for the sharing from our distinguished speakers today. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me introduce to you to our moderator and first speaker today. He holds a first-class economics degree from University Malaya, an MBA e-commerce from Edith Cowan University, Australia, and an executive education from University of Cambridge, UK, on circular economy and sustainability strategies. He is a regular speaker and moderator in sustainability-related events and has been interviewed on leading Malaysian TV programs such as Astro Awani's Notepad with Ibrahim Sani and Bernama's Nation. Our moderator and first speaker for today is the Sustainability Lead and Director of Oil and Gas, Chemicals, Energy and Raw Materials of the Malaysia External Trade Development Corporation, MATRID, Mr. Sdg Shankar. Before I pass the session to Mr. J, I would like to request for our moderator, speakers, distinguished guests, and the secretariat to turn on your webcams so that we can take a group photograph. 3, 2, 1. Okay. To all participants, you may now switch on your webcams for another group photograph. Ready? Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you all. Now, to begin our webinar, I would like to invite Mr. J. Shankar to moderate the session. Mr. J, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shalini. Now that we have done away with the Malaysian staff of taking photographs. Hey, Ms. Wee Ching Yun, Chairman of Mpma Sustainability Subcommittee, my esteemed fellow speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, salam sejahtera, and a very good afternoon to all of you. Firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Mpma for giving MATRID an opportunity to be part of this very interesting seminar. My topic today is basically in regards to the relevance of sustainability relevance of sustainability to exporters. Okay, sorry. All right, so I'm going to do a quick overview of the Malaysian plastic industry. I think all of us know the Malaysian plastic industry is quite widespread, very diversified. And in terms of breakdown of products, basically, if you look at it, packaging constitutes a big chunk of the product segment, followed by E&E. Now, the bright spot of the whole conversation today is the fact these numbers. These numbers indicate that the Malaysian plastic sector is quite healthy. Yeah, if you look at the numbers, it has been growing quite well over the last few years. In 2021, for example, exports reached 16.01 billion, and this is quite a big growth. This gives you a better indication of the kind of growth that the industry has experienced over the years. It is an upward trajectory, and hopefully we'll be able to maintain this upward growth. But in order to do that, when we scan across the horizon, now Madrid has 46 offices worldwide. These are not only marketing opportunities, marketing platforms for Madrid to push exporters globally, but they're also conduits for us to pick up information, market intel. And these 46 offices tell us one thing. And the common theme has been that the relevance of sustainability to exporters it's not only happening, but it's happening in a very quick way. The urgency is on the rise. And this is largely because of three core factors. One, international policies. A lot of stuff that are happening across the world on an international front, that Malaysia is a participant. Malaysia being a very open economy, it's a participant in many of these discussions, many of these policy-making processes. And that is providing some level of pressure for change. Then you have the stakeholder pressure and rising consumer expectations. Let's look a bit on the policy part. Now, there is a great level of commitment given during the last COP26. I think most of us are aware of it. And there's a lot of government level commitment given. Malaysia, for example, has given a commitment that by 2050, we will become carbon neutral. And that's a big commitment. And other countries have done similarly. Now, what that essentially means is that now countries will start looking at, they have, one second, I think the slides have changed. Yeah, let me stop sharing here. So I'm going to start sharing it again. Yeah, I think there was a. See it? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that was a commitment given by the countries on that level. And then what basically happened was that commitment then gets cascaded down on a bilateral level, right? So when Malaysian government gets involved in trade deals, there is a lot of involvement in regards to this sort of issues. For example, if you look at CPTPP, there is a labor chapter, chapter 19, which essentially focuses on compliance, on recognized labor rights, how to enhance cooperation, consultation on labor issues, and so on. And then there's chapter 20 on environment, which basically promotes mutually supportive trade and environmental policies and effective enforcement of environmental laws in CPTPP parties. Now, this is just one example. If you look at that, those are multilateral agreements. And if you look at bilateral agreements, we have, I think many of you all probably have noticed that we have started re-looking into our agreement with EU, our FTA with EU, which we first started sometime in 2010. And if we look at how EU looks into their bilateral FTAs, An example is its FTA. The first ever FTA it did was with South Korea. And even back then, they've already had a trade and sustainable development chapter, which covers issues such as environment, labor rights, climate change, and responsible business conduct. This basically means that on that government level, the Malaysian government, as well as other governments, have started committing their industries to certain targets, certain areas of conformity that is aligned to the SDG agenda, the sustainability agenda. Right? And then what happens from a stakeholder perspective, right? Across your global value chain, increasingly it is governed by sustainability standards, and global buyers are shifting their purchasing preference to goods that demonstrate sound environmental and social standards. Not only goods, but also organizations that practice and demonstrate sound ESG standards. And in order to sort of push forward this agenda, large buyers, large importers, they've come together in different segments. For example, you have something called Responsible Business Alliance, which is the world's largest industry coalition dedicated to corporate social responsibility in global supply chains. And these members are the largest, some of the largest Fortune 500 companies in the world, the likes of Amazon, Apple, BMW, Dell, and so on. And mind you, the plastic industry is an industry that cuts across various different industries. And when you have these large conglomerates coming together and trying to put across their message and saying that this is important, that is very important for them to start greening their supply chain. That's a message that I think none of us can afford to miss. An example of a company that's done so in a very precise way is Walmart. I'm sure many of you all are already exporting to Walmart. Now, Walmart has something called the Project Gigaton, for example, where it partners with suppliers to avoid 1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases from the global value chain by 2030. And then you have the Walmart Recycle together. Essentially what it means is that there is a lot of effort done by many of these companies on various levels, right? It could be simply a process where they're looking at how can they recycle the products that they generate, or it could be on ESG compliance, how they take care of their community and so on. Yeah, but ultimately a lot of it is related to how do you manage to reduce your carbon footprint from manufacturing, from distribution processes, supply chain, and so on. And they get involved, although in many cases they are not maybe a direct purchaser. For example, BMW is part of an alliance in the rubber industry. They don't buy rubber directly. Similarly, many of these companies don't have to be directly involved, but now the responsibility, the onus is on them by their shareholders that they need to know what's happening down their supply chain. Now, then you come down to the consumers. The consumers' expectations are also very strong in regards to how they feel that companies should address social and environmental issues. So the expectation is there. And not only the expectation is there today, because of technologies such as social media and so on, they can actually articulate if there are any grievances on products or brands or companies. They can actually articulate that, and that could have a major impact, maybe not to you directly. If you're an SME, you're somewhere down the value chain, it might not affect you initially, but if it is affecting your principal, then somewhere down the line, we might also be affected. Yeah. So here you look at the number, 90% basically says they would boycott a company they learned of irresponsible or destructive business practices. Yeah. So clearly, a lot of consumers would make a decision, and they will let their pockets make a decision as well. Yeah. Now, in that context of everything, is the government serious? Yeah. Well, simply said, yes. Yeah. If you look at what the Malaysian government has done way back in 2011, they've actually started, this process started way back then, by looking into areas where they can get involved. In 2015, the government put in the commitment when SDGs were crafted. Mind you, SDGs came prior to that, you had the Millennium Goals, yeah? So the conversation on sustainable growth has started during the Millennium Goals period, yeah? And then you have the National Sdg Council, which is basically led and chaired by the Prime Minister. Then you get many SDG related technical committees and steering committees involving a lot of ministries. Now, if you look at this is a very quick snapshot of some of the ministries, but today lot more ministries and agencies are getting involved. I just spoke to Exim Bank, for example. They have a sustainability team. Bank Negara has it. So even the financial institutions are getting involved, because finance clearly is a major part of it. Yeah, and then if you look at what Martrade is doing, we look at the industry and adoption in two broad areas. One is we look at how do we build capacity for the exporters. So in this context, it's important for us to know that the companies are ready before the expectation for them to conform to as the sustainability agenda comes in play. So Martrade has something called Sustainability Action Values for Exporters, SAFE program, which we engage and collaborate with industry partners and companies, where we roll out a lot of programs related to learning and collaboration and knowledge sharing. And then on the right, if you look at it, we have something called the National Trade Blueprint, where the National Trade Blueprint has been designed to increase Malaysia's export competitiveness. And one of the major thrusts here is sustainability in innovation. So that's there as well. So in this context, we look at two parts. One is enhancing industry and the other one is growing trade. Okay? And these are some of the funding that is available for in Martrade that maybe it's not directly related to sustainability, but definitely it can be related to. And this is the interesting part about sustainability. Yeah? A lot of us feel that you got to have something very precise and specific to sustainability. Is not the case. Many of the current government funding structure is already related to sustainability. For example, Industry 4.0, if you don't have a digitalization process, it's very difficult for you to have a data architecture that's able to capture data and do data traceability and do data transparency and so on. So many of this funding can be made use for ultimately for your journey for sustainability agenda. Now, this is interesting because these are those are general ones just now I mentioned, but these are five very specific funding that currently available for any SME who wants to go into the low carbon transition mode. Yeah, the first one is what we call the low carbon transition facility. This is actually offered by MOF through Bank Negara. It's about $2 billion worth of loans given to commercial banks for any activities that will allow SMEs to make that transition to becoming low carbon. It could be as simple as you're putting up a solar panel in your facility, yeah, or it could be R&D involved, where you are trying to now look at developing products that would have a greener footprint. So that is something. It's a new fund. Perhaps not many people are aware. It's a loan mechanism. I think the interest rate is something like 5%. So that's there. And then you have the Green Technology Financing Scheme. This is through Dana Jamin. This has been around. It was announced in the last budget. And then you have something called the Sustainable and Green Business Financing, also under Treasury. And then you have the My SDG Trust Fund under MOF, and you have the Integrated National Financing Framework. What we can do is that after today's session, we'll be more than happy, one, to share the slides that we have. Two is also become the sort of focal point, if you may, for any companies in attendance today who would like to reach out to the respective agencies cited here to access those funds. So we can be the gateway. You can contact us, and then we can maybe arrange for appointments for the respective SMEs to meet up with, say, the officers in charge of these respective funds. In some cases, like in the case of the Low Carbon Transition Facility Fund, you can actually go to any commercial bank, because every commercial bank has been given the task to disperse this particular fund. So the commercial bank will then take up your request, and then they will basically deal with Bank Negara in terms of the disbursement. So in other words, the Malaysian government has been very sensitive about the need to support the SMEs towards their compliance or for sustainability, and these are some of the funds that is available. These are the other funds through Martrade that we can look into, and hand-holding programs as well. Moving forward, and this is a message that I like to look through. Yeah. First of all, for the longest of time, they've always looked at price and quality to make a difference at the marketplace. Today, what we like to say is that there is this additional element called sustainability. So a lot of times, I think when we start having discussions with SMEs in regards to encouraging them to take up sustainability, there is always this pushback of saying that, you know what, how is it going to make a difference to my bottom line? But today the bottom line is not only about price. There's something called the triple bottom line, and the third bottom line basically will come from sustainability. Yeah, sustainability is something that can generate revenue and profits, because remember, every country has put commitment. When the countries put commitment, they will then go to their industries and they're going to push their industries to conform. And when the industries has started putting targets, they will then push the companies involved to do that. And these companies, we're talking about your potential buyers and importers. So they need to green their supply chain. So any company, Malaysian suppliers, exporters, who then reach out to them and say, look, I have something green. And the green can be on various fronts. It could be green product, your carbon footprint reduction could be on a product level, it could be on an organizational level, it could be on a process level. Yeah, but the thing is this: you don't have to do everything at one go. Do something, and then it becomes easier for an organization like Market, for example. When we reach out to a buyer, we can do the storytelling a lot easier, because you now have some level of sustainability element ingrained and embedded into your processes or your products that we can talk about. So it's not more price and quality alone. I think that's one key message that we like to focus on. And so if you look at it positively, in many cases, we are losing out in terms of price. Quality is a common denominator, but in terms of price, a lot of times, for example, we struggle maybe with the likes of China or Vietnam. Now, so today, suddenly the narrative could change, because the buyer now, he has his own targets. Say he's Walmart, he has his own targets. So he's not only fixated by price, he now need to start looking at it. And who knows, if you're lucky enough, there has been also occasions where the buyers are willing to pay a price premium to a particular supplier, because they need to fulfill their own ESG targets, their own carbon footprint targets. Yeah, and so dealing with companies or exporters who are able to give them that confidence, that they understand the importance, and they've done something related to ESG compliance, specifically for carbon footprint especially, and they've safeguarded the environment through certain initiatives and so on. That is a major plus point. And how is it going to impact you as an exporter? Now, again, it's a major challenge. You say, look, the time is tough. How do I do this? So for us, it's not only about risk, because every time the conversation takes place, SMEs, it always goes around saying, can I afford this? Yes, you can, and you should. The government will play its part, but internally, you got to see a value proposition on taking this journey. The journey is not about greenwashing. A lot of SMEs sometimes, tend to do things that maybe it's not real. So let's do something real, because it can give you a competitive advantage. And when it gives you competitive advantage, there are three things that could potentially happen. One, it's going to improve your market access. As mentioned just now, Market has 46 offices. And principally, if you look at our exports of plastic products, a lot of it are to developed economies. The products are going to the likes of United States, it's going to the likes of EU. And these are traditionally regions and countries that have very strong regulatory framework in order to make sure that the exports are green in principle. Yeah, as many of you all know, for example, EU has been putting across a lot of legislations, a CBAM legislation that's coming through, where they're going to potentially look at putting up taxes for companies and exports without the green footprint. Yeah, so they're going to punish companies that has not done certain things in regards to conformity, don't have a calculation, they don't know what's their carbon emission like, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So in other words, rather than being a barrier for entry, if we take this journey up, suddenly the doors are going to open. Market access is going to be easy. For example, Market is going to participate, we're going to have a national pavilion in KFair, which is probably one of the largest fair related to plastics and rubber. And one of the things that we're looking at, and one of the major things of KFair is on sustainability. Yeah, and Martin, way back in 2019, when we chose companies, selected companies to be part of our national pavilion, we were looking at the ESG component. We were looking at whether this particular exporter knew about that particular aspects of business. Yeah, today, obviously, we will look at it even closer. And simply because eventually when you do reach to the shores of EU and so on, the buyers are under pressure to look at it. And the buyers' pressure, by the way, is not only coming from their customers, it is also coming from the likes of their bankers. The bankers today, if you take Commerce Bank in Germany, for example, for many years, their trade financing is based on ESG compliance. Yeah. So if they see that one or their suppliers of their clients are not green for various reasons, they might not even finance it. So your buyer then it's under tremendous amount of pressure for them. So, but if you do have it, guess what? It's going to open up doors. Yeah, that's one. Two, in the long run, then it's going to strengthen your brand. For the longest of time, Malaysia struggles with a lack of brand proposition. Yeah. So what do you stand for? Typically, if you open an SME's website today, what do you see? If you're lucky, you see something nice, yeah? And if you do have something nice, then the next step is, what are you talking about? A lot of times we end up talking about the product. The product stuff will be there. We'll talk about the manufacturing processes and so on. But it's not necessarily needs to be the case in the long run. If you're doing something related to sustainability, you've done something, you put up some solar panels, for example, and you've done, some, maybe you're using some green chemicals in your processes and so on, you can talk about that, because it's important for you to tell your potential buyer, your importer, that you do understand the need, the urgency of it. Because this is what one of the key criteria they're looking out for. They need partners, they need people within their supply chain who understands the importance of it, and they're going to walk the mile. For us as government as well, we are looking for SMEs who can walk the mile. And for us to support, we need champions who can do that, because ultimately over time, this is going to be a major decision factor. Yeah. So we are looking at that. And for you as a brand proposition, you grow your brand, right? It's so you're not only competing again on price and quality alone. Third is going to drive innovation. And that is going to be one of the most exciting areas, because eventually you will look at it and you're going to see opportunities here. You're going to see, for example, wow, I've got this particular product, but I can innovate and I can create another product or processes that is going to be a lot more attuned to the ESG area. And that's going to drive innovation, right? And once that happens, guess what? Your business is going to be sustainable, which then brings me to the final slide. And the final message, if there's anything that you would like to remember from today's conversation, it's this. Because a lot of times when we discuss with the companies, they say, look, you know what, we are on a survivability mode. And what we are trying to tell them is, it's not about survivability versus sustainability. Rather, it is sustainability equates to survivability. If you're not prepared to invest today, if you're not prepared to walk the mile, you are going to struggle 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the line. Believe me, it's real. This is a mega trend that's not going to go away. It is either going to make you be very, very successful in the export market, not only the export market, eventually in the domestic market, but principally in the export market. It's going to make you very successful. And that's how you got to see it. You got to see this as a critically an advantage, a positive thing. And if you don't walk the mile, you are going to struggle, because other countries are putting a tremendous amount of effort. We have constant communication, for example, with our counterparts in Singapore, and you can clearly see there are a lot of companies there, for example, and or any developed economies, they are seeing this as a major, major opportunity. So in other words, just to reiterate again, it is not about survivability versus sustainability, ladies and gentlemen, but rather it is sustainability equates to survivability. With that, I will say thank you, and I will take a leave now and hand it over back to Ms. Shalini. Thank you very much.
Hi, Mr. Jai. Now we would like you to
Hi, Shalini.
introduce you to the next speaker, Mr. Alvin from Tongwan.
Okay, so I will now take over, Ms. Shalini.
Yeah, I'll pass it on back to you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shalini.
Okay.
Thank you very
Christian.
much. Ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned earlier, I'll be moderating the next two presentations that we have today with our esteemed lineup. I now have the pleasure to introduce our next speaker. He is Mr. Alvin Ang, who is the chairman of Mpma, Mpma Northern Branch. He is also the executive director of Tongguan Industries Berhad. Mr. Alvin has since 11 December 2013 been instrumental in planning the listing of TGI, Tongguan Industries, on the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange, and he has contributed tremendously to the growth of TGI, especially in the fields of finance, taxation, project planning and implementation, information technology, operations, and marketing. With that, I like to now have the pleasure to introduce and bring about Mr. Alvin. Mr. Alvin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jai Shankar. That's a very good introduction. My mom should listen to it. Let me share my screen. Can see the screen, everyone?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Good, thank you. Just one promotional slide to start off things, who we are. Our company was started by my great-grandfather, Mr. Ang Tongguan, in 1942 during the Japanese occupation with $50 borrowed from his father-in-law. Today, we are a billion ringgit company. Our revenue last year was 1.2 billion and PBT was 125 million. We are the largest company in Kedah with market capitalization in excess of close to R1 billion. We are the 10th largest producer of stretch film in the world. This is according to Applied Market Information, one of the most respected UK-based market research company. We are also the largest exporter of garbage bags to Japan. About 12% of the total garbage bags consumed in Japan is from us. 90% of all our plastic products are exported to more than 80 countries. We also made it to the Forbes Asia Best under $1 billion company last year, which lists 20 of the most well-managed public listed company in Asia. And we aspire to double our revenue to 2 billion ringgit by 2028 with concrete plans. Having said that, you will imagine how much carbon emission that we are emitting. Thus, the next slide, our board is very committed to ESG. Our chairman is the Duli Yang Teramat Mulia, the Tuanku Raja Muda of Kedah. He's a champion of ESG. And we will show you the commitment that we put in, a bit from his contribution. But today we are just looking at the E aspect of things, which is already huge, heaps of it. This slide, we take it out from our annual report. This is basically the things that, the environmental things that we are doing as a company to reduce our carbon emission. It sets out some of our goals that we want to achieve in our communication to all our stakeholders, our investors, our shareholders, our suppliers, the government. Mr. Jai Shankar is listening. 30% of, we want to increase the recycled content of our products to 30% by 2035. Currently, we are working on to get it to 15% level by 2025. And I'll explain in the next slides on how we're going to do it. On the greenhouse gases, we intend to reduce it by 10% by 2025. We are now focusing on scope 1 and scope 2 of the effort. This will be explained later as well. 10% reduction in consumption of per kilogram output for water. We are calculating that. Renewable energy, 10% by 2025 and 20% by 2035. This is very achievable, even though the focus now is on solar panels, which the government is promoting very aggressively. A lot of incentive. Encourage you guys to look into it and take advantage of it before it goes away. It is going away anyway. And we heard from the industry that the government is introducing, liberalizing the electricity distribution to enable more competition in distribution other than TNB. So there's quite a bit of opportunity if you set up later on your own solar farm for your own consumption. It's possible, probably in the pipeline. 10% to achieve 10% post-consumer recycle from our production. Innovative product design, which I'll explain in the next slides. Sustainability investment, of course. All our investments, we are looking at GTFS, which Mr. Jai Shankar shared just now. There's a lot of incentive still, so take advantage of it now. And of course, the Sustainability Development Goals, the UN SDG, we are aggressively looking at it and implementing it. Going back to the first circle, promoting recycling. All our in-house facilities are equipped with in-house recycling machines. These are some of the pictures that we take from the various manufacturing facilities. Rejected products are treated at the site where it is because every location, every facility knows what sort of recycled product that they can use back, and we try to, as much as possible, use back in our recycling. This is saving money anyway, decreasing cost definitely, and those that are dirty, I mean colored, printed films, they are recycled at our facility in Gurun, which we have increased the number of recycling facilities there as well, and is continually expanding due to the expanding size of the group. Thus, we have a lot of things to recycle. Segregation at source is very important. This we practice in-house. This is, if you want to start doing this, this is probably the area that you can start to formulate. You can see by colors, these are all the printed materials, the colored films that is segregated into yellow, green, and the rest of it. So that when you recycle it, the green color will come out and you can use it in the next process of green bags, for example, or yellow bags. And it can help reduce your master batch consumption anyway. By grade, of course, the various grades of the product that we produce. For example, the stretch film that we produce, we segregate into the various grade, hand wrap grade, machine wrap grades, and all that. And the recycle is similarly, the recycled material is similarly segregated according to this as well. And this is reused in the production of the various grades. You can see the various departments segregating the goods according to the products that is manufactured. We have also done, we try to use up to 50% recycled content in our product. We've got a research and development center, the Newton Research and Development Center, which has collaborated with some major raw material players that these are some of this video basically shows the quality of recycled resin that is produced in-house. And it is used to produce similarly blown film. You can see that it is for shrink film. It ties all the waters at the right. A bit of shrink film for the local mineral water industry. 50% of recycled product. We've done quite a bit of research on it, and you can see that in terms of COF, probably the virgin is on the left and the post-consumer recycle are on the right. You can see that in terms of coefficient of friction test, the PCR gives a better readings. These are some of the advantages of using recycled products. This slide basically shows the comparison between a virgin and also a recycled, 50% recycled shrink film. And you can see that the quality that comes up is almost the same if you take care of your material at source. The recycled material, I mean. Innovative product design is our continuous effort. We came up with the Max Stretch back in 2008. It basically reduced the consumption of resin use by reducing the thickness of standard hand wrap application. From the standard hand wrap application is about 20 to 23 microns. That's the average. That's about the average thickness of your hair. We reduce it to 12 microns. That gives you more meterage in terms of the number of kilograms, net kilogram of film. For example, locally, we have 2.06 kilogram net of weight normally in a roll of film. So if you use a 23 micron film, that will yield you about 210 meters. For the 12 micron film, it will yield you 400 meters. That means it can wrap 100% more. Okay, meaning that the 210 meters film will probably be able to wrap 5 pallets, and the 400 meters are able to wrap 10 pallets, for example, and the price is probably 25% more. So it's quite a no-brainer that you shift to the thinner film, which is more environmental friendly and save you money as well. And this has been very well adopted in developed countries like Australia, and initially when we started there, and of course Europe, and now even Japan. This is a video that I want to show. It's basically Nano Zero is some of the innovation that we do. It's got no core. With the core, no core, pre-stretch, 6 micron film. We mentioned just now 12 micron. We managed to pre-stretch the film to 6 microns. You can see a lot of air bubbles inside the film. Folded edge to strengthen the edge so that it won't tear so easily. And nano green is basically 30% content. We are also ISSC Plus and also GRS certified, our facilities. We got that on February 2022. This ISSC has helped us. I'll show you in the next slide. We are also doing LCA life cycle analysis with CRIM currently in compliance with ISO 14044. the standard environmental management life cycle and assessment, which I think Dr. Cheong will elaborate. This ISSC Plus has helped us to go to the UK government and tell them that our product is 30% recycled, and we are exempted from paying the £200 per ton or 20 pence per kilogram of plastic that you are importing from Europe beginning from 1st of April 2022. So it's helping us in our export effort a lot. GET program, this is to reduce the greenhouse emission. GHG, this GET program is initiated by TNB. We are part of it. We are one of the biggest subscriber of GET. Nestle is one of it. When Nestle launched their GET, they launched a very big media campaign on this. We saw in the paper, but we are not so flashy. But we're one of the largest. It's basically the ICPT that TNB charge you on the imbalance cost pass-through, that the 3.7 cents that you see in your electricity bill, everyone has got to pay for it now, on top of course, the subsidized for green energy and all that the TNB is charging. We have to double that in order to subscribe to GET, meaning that we are using the buying from TNB, they are buying they're buying sustainable energy from, for example, the solar farms and all that. So we are buying that green portion of it. You can actually sell your carbon credit. You know, if you install solar panel on your rooftop, you can actually sell that carbon credit internationally. I've just found out that quite recently as well. But we're not selling it because we want to get to carbon neutral. Of course, solar panel, we intend to install solar panel in all our facilities. It's one of our facility. Says here, since installation, our combined use of 13,300 megawatt of renewable energy. Currently, we are using about 10 megawatt of electricity a month. That's huge. That's equivalent to about 8,000 ton of carbon emission. Our target is to use renewable energy, 10% of it by 2025 and 20% by 2035. I explained just now, this is achievable. Some of our facilities, you can see. Back it up. Water management, our China plant actually started rainwater harvesting. We are going into this as well, to the point whereby we can use it to run our cooling towers, to replenish the water that goes into our cooling tower, and ultimately, of course, the chillers. We are exploring this with the contractors at the moment. Basically, sustainability is everyone's accountability, and I thank you for listening. Back to you, Mr. Jai Shankar.
Thank you very much, Alvin. I mean, it's an amazing journey, honestly speaking. I mean, it's one of those things that you hope that every company in Malaysia does. So it's good to have a champion. Thank you very much again. With that, we now will move to our next presenter, Dr. Cheong Meng Soon, who's a research fellow at University Technology Malaysia. He is basically from the School of Mechanical Engineering, University Technology Malaysia. He's been there since 2017. His recent research focused on life cycle assessment to assist industries in assessing their environmental load and impacts towards carbon neutrality and circular economy. He has been working closely with the National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology, Japan, on developing LCI data sets for various Malaysian industries, including the plastic industry. His topic will be, let's start together life cycle assessment for your company. We're all looking forward to his presentation. Clearly, Dr. Chong, the floor is now yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jai. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm here to talk about how you can do a life cycle assessment for your company. And that's, in fact, the first step of knowing our own carbon footprint. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank Mpma as well for inviting me to give this webinar here. So we have already heard from Mr. Jai, like the climate change is one of the biggest issue in the world around right now. And it is one of the most talked about topic nowadays, apart from the pandemic and the war, of course. And this is the war with everyone, in fact, the climate change. The global average temperature is increasing in 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. So that is a lot. In 10 years' time, we're talking about our ambient temperature is going to increase by 2 degrees. And the consequence of that, I think nowadays everyone can start to feel it even more. The unpredictable climate, the seawater, the melting of the ice cap and so on give rise to a higher sea level, flooding everywhere. So the impact is definitely there and everyone can feel it. And we have heard about many countries has committed to carbon neutrality. In fact, to date, I just checked 2 days ago, I think now there's about 137 countries already committed for that, including Malaysia. And majority of them are actually set a target to achieve so by as soon as 2050. That gives us about, say, under 30 years to achieve so. And ironically, even though in 2020, because of pandemic, the global carbon emission actually reduced for the first time in many years, in decades, in fact, not years. But last year, as the world economy started to recover, it actually reached the highest than ever before, because the surge in the electricity demand, most of the country simply couldn't cope with it. So they go back to burn more coal and to generate the power to accommodate the growth. So it's definitely not a good start for sure. But any changes that we're going to make, any changes that your company is going to have, the first step always is a self-evaluation. So we need to know our goal first. We know the goal, in fact, we want to achieve net zero, which means at least we balance out whatever we emit, we can remove it as well. But the question is how much we need to reduce. So self-evaluation is always the most important part of any transformation. And we also talk about hear about ESG from Mr. Jai and also Mr. Alvin just now. And it's something that getting more and more important and everyone start to talk about it. So what are they essentially? It's almost like a scoring, someone going to put on how well you do in terms of sustainability, in terms of social aspect, and also governance. So the ESG rating is evaluated based on many different type of ESG risk factor, is what they call it. And let me just open here. So what we may see here, I list out some of it. And you may see the ESG risk factor, the one at the top, in fact, is something called the climate change risk. So that essentially is how much the carbon footprint of your company to operate not just the activity in your company alone, but also the entire scope of your supply chain and also your downstream process, which we'll have a look in a minute. On top of that, there are also other risk factors which less often being talked about, such as water management, energy efficiency, waste management, pollution of air, water, deforestation, and also the land use. So all these essentially are what we call a environmental impact category. It measures how much damage a certain activity could have done to the environment. And obviously, if someone going to evaluate one company or one body in terms of sustainability, they need some sort of index like this or category like this, so that they can quantify a value, and from there they can start to give a rating to show that how good this company actually are in terms of the ESG. And the two presenters just now already talked about the importance of ESG. It can increase your internal value proposition. It can also satisfy the external demand from the investor, the stakeholder. But one thing that quite important here is to mitigate the environmental risk. For instance, if let's say someone have a solar panel in their company, so they are not relying that much on the electricity from the grid. So in case there's any surge in electricity, which thankfully we didn't experience that in the recovery of COVID-19, but China definitely did. If you remember a few months ago, their factory actually shut down because the government just limit the number of days they can actually operate because the electricity actually start to surge. So in that case, if someone have their own self-supply electricity, they could actually continue to operate. And all of this, the one thing that I would like to highlight is environmental sustainability is definitely going to become, and in fact, is already starting to become an integral part of any business performance index. So someone is definitely trying to give a scoring to how well you've done in terms of environmental sustainability. So exactly how someone can measure climate change. That's when we start to hear about carbon footprinting or life cycle assessment. Okay, so the objective of my presentation here is to hopefully can give you a more insight what actually a carbon footprint is and how someone can actually do it. And the name itself is actually quite self-explanatory, is carbon footprinting. So it is about calculating the total amount of greenhouse gas generated by your company activity. And I say greenhouse gases because even though it is expressed in the unit of kg CO2, but not that there is a equivalent at back, because it's not just about the carbon dioxide emission only. It includes all the greenhouse gas that could potentially do the same harm as a carbon dioxide to our climate change, or specifically the impact that we are talking about here is global warming. And if we look, because it's expressed in equivalent, so there must be a scale, like a conversion rate from one greenhouse gas to the carbon dioxide. And I quickly pull a chart here showing how we call it how potent these different greenhouse gas actually compare to a carbon dioxide. So at the bottom here, this is the carbon dioxide. Obviously, 1 unit or 1 kg of carbon dioxide equal to 1 kg CO2 equivalent. But if you look at methane, we look at nitrous oxide. The scale here is not in linear, it's a logarithm scale. So all these greenhouse gas, in fact, is having much more effect to the global warming compared to carbon dioxide. So for instance, if you release 1 kg of methane somehow from whatever system that you have, it is almost equal to 25 kg of CO2, which is why it's called CO2 equivalent. So to put it simple, it's not just about, if let's say you feel that your system, your manufacturing process itself doesn't release CO2, that doesn't mean you don't have any carbon footprint. In fact, if I'll just put a simple example here, this is a very simple process, manufacturing flow for a bottled water, simple enough. The bottle starts from the raw material extraction, going through manufacturing process, then it might go through some transportation, make into the bottle, then go fill up the water, transport the customer, then consumer buy it, go back, drink, and then throw away. And last, hopefully it get recycled. So this is a very typical product life cycle, a very simple one. And greenhouse gas, in fact, could happen at every single stage of this product life. So from the extraction itself to the manufacturing, transportation, even the consumer, if let's say for certain product, such as, for instance, clothing, not water bottle in this case because you don't wash it, but let's say for clothing, you put into washing machine and wash. So all that consume electricity. So a typical carbon footprint will actually account for that kind of usage as well. But the highlight here, I guess, is greenhouse gas emission actually come from everywhere in most of our industry activity. We can't run away from that. It's just the extent some is lower, some might be higher. So industry like the smelting industry probably will release a lot of greenhouse gases compared to plastic industry, right? Doesn't mean that we are safe from that. And we look at the entire life cycle, the life cycle of a product just now, and so many different greenhouse gas coming from different phase of the life of the product. So how do we measure? What is the scope for carbon footprinting? We need to know to what extent we need to be responsible, right? We can't be starting to care that something which is probably do a very have very little to do with us. So the scope of, in fact, life cycle or carbon footprinting, that is the first thing someone need to set from the beginning. They need to know until where they need to improve. And very often you hear about the scope 1, 2, and 3, right? So the scope 1, to put it simple, is basically the activity from your own company, your own process, the vehicle in your company that do the, for instance, like your forklift that run inside your factory to move things around. So all these are categorized under scope 1. So sometimes we call it the direct emission from your activity. And it could come from the melting of resin, right? If something melts, sure, it gives some emission. It's just what it is. In the plastic industry case, most of it is a volatile organic compound. And when someone talk about greenhouse gas, probably they didn't hear about volatile organic compound very often because the VOC, in fact, is an indirect greenhouse gas. So the effect actually affect the ozone first, then it goes to the climate change, the global warming. So that is scope 1, straightforward. Scope 2, to put it simple, is the energy that you are using. The electricity, if you are using steam, you're buying steam from someone, you're buying some sort of heat from other. So all that fall under scope 2. So it's an indirect emission that you need to be responsible as well, which is why when we hear someone say that they want to reduce carbon footprint, they start to install solar panel, because by reduce the amount of electricity they actually purchase and use, instead they use a clean electricity supply they can generate themselves. So in that sense, they're actually reducing the scope 2 emission. And that basically comes from what we call the upstream activity, because this is something that actually being used, not coming directly from you. Whereas for the scope 3, it covers pretty much, I would say, the rest of the thing that actually concern you, from your supply chain to the transportation that actually transport the goods from supplier to you, and also from you to your downstream process to to the waste management and so on. So all that, not pretty much everything not in scope 1 and 2 will actually be covered in the 3. And of course here, some company might be more concerned about is the employee commuting and also the business travel. One company is actually practicing. So all in all, this is the, up until now, the definition of scope for carbon footprinting. So how it is being calculated? How do we calculate the carbon footprint, right? So we know the scope already. So exactly how do we calculate it? It's a calculation. And the equation for it is in fact very simple. Is the input times the factor we get, the output, right? And the input is all the resource that you consume in your factory. So this could be the electricity consumption, natural gas, or even any chemical consumption. And you time a certain factor, which will go into what it is. You get the output, which is your carbon footprint, or the kg CO2 equivalent. And to know your entire carbon footprint in your factory, it's just a matter of sum them all together. If you have 100 input, go into your factory to make sure factory run. You just have to do this 100 times. You sum everything together, you get your carbon footprint. And you just have to divide according to the scope that we defined just now. You get your scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon footprint, in fact. But the most important part is, what are these factors? Where do we get it, right? So this factor is, to put simple, is a compilation of input to output value, right? Because we multiply this with input, we get the output. So usually the unit is the kg CO2 equivalent for 1 unit of input. I'll give an example here, electricity in Malaysia, right? So if someone ever searched this before, electricity in Malaysia, this is roughly the carbon footprint at the grid that we are using. It's about 0.7 kg of CO2 for 1 kilowatt hour. So which means if you run one machine, 1 kilowatt rating of power consumption for 1 hour, you are equal to releasing 0.73 kg of CO2 equivalent. And this factor sometimes is also referred as the Lifecycle database, if we are talking about Lifecycle assessment here. But more importantly, where these are obtained from is obviously has to be based on prior study. Someone studied this before. And it has to be on this particular industry. In fact, not only based on this industry, it's also very dependent on geographical area where we are talking about, right? So continuing, if this factor that govern the greenhouse gas emission, we call it as the emission factor. Sometimes that's what you heard. And I'll give a very simple yet very extreme example here, right? The electricity grid, just that we talked about just now. This 0.7 kg of CO2 equivalent for 1 unit of electricity that we are using is coming from how we Malaysia, at least in the Peninsular Malaysia, doesn't apply to the Sabah and Sarawak state because they have their own electricity mix. So at least for the Peninsular Malaysia, almost half of our electricity are powered by coal. Another 1/3 by natural gas, and quite a large portion, I would say about 16%, is from hydro. And of course, there are a few percent of solar and so on. And if we look at United States, right, they only have 21% of coal, 38% of natural gas, but they have nuclear power. They have more different variation of renewable energy, wind, hydro. So in combination of everything, their carbon footprint for electricity is in fact half of what we actually having. So to put it simple, if we are using the factor from United States, whatever carbon footprint that we calculate towards the end, sensibly speaking, it will be half from what we're actually emitting. So we are not actually looking at the correct baseline that we're trying to improve. And if we extend the example to China, China is almost using half of their 50% coal to power the electricity. But in comparison to us, they don't use so much natural gas. They have much more renewable energy. So their emission factor is in fact slightly lower. And our neighboring country, Singapore, pretty much doesn't use coal at all. They use mostly natural gas and I would say almost no renewable energy, very small fraction compared to their entire electricity mix. But just by using the correct energy source, in fact, their emission factor for electricity at grid is much, much lower than us. So where this emission factor, where can we, if someone doing carbon footprint, how they get this kind of emission factor? Now, you may come across many different institutions providing different carbon footprinting tools. Like I pull two examples here, one from the Sdg protocol, another from Carbon Footprint Limited. So if you do look into these two calculation tools, you may notice that they are using something called IPCC emission factor and also UNFCCC emission factor. By far the two largest institutions that providing emission factor. But they are covering mostly the developed Western nation because the Western nation, in fact, start all this sustainability study way, way earlier compared to us. We are only starting to talk about it now. They have started this in the background, probably from 90s or early 2000s. So they have the time to develop a very comprehensive database of factors that allow them to do the evaluation very easily already by now. And some of you, if have looked into carbon footprinting even further, you probably came across all these names. These are sometimes called the third-party database. These are essentially a life cycle database come out from different regions in the world. For instance, the first two here are actually mostly representing United States market. The IOCD from European Commission, obviously representing European nation. And recently you might also hear about the global LCA data access, or GLAD we call it in short. So this is like a directory that help, they compile everything together so that someone can have like a one-stop directory that can find where to get their factor. But to put it simple, in short, none of these are in fact specifically for Malaysia market. And this is by far, in fact, our primary difficulty for us to do our own carbon footprinting. We could use this factor from other countries. It roughly give an idea, but it will never be accurate because fundamentally the electricity that we are using, everyone is using, is already different. So how can we improve our own carbon footprint? Simple, we have to construct our own emission factor. And the first step of doing that is in fact by conducting our scope 1 emission measurement, the direct emission measurement from your industry. When this one is correct, the rest of it will start to come into picture. And after this, I'm going to show that. But the first step is always measuring your own activity. What kind of direct emission coming out from your activity? What I have here is just an example of long film. And suppose that this is the reporting company, which is you. And we know that carbon footprinting also cover the scope 2 and 3. So which means besides measuring your own, you need to record the amount of resource that you're consuming. The electricity, whatever chemical you're using, whatever additive, all of you are plastic manufacturer. So resin is definitely your raw material. All of that should go through transportation down to the downstream activity, the transportation for the product, the solid waste, the scheduled waste, if there's any, those that go into the end of life treatment. So all this in fact needs to be properly recorded. And most importantly, I must emphasize again, is this scope 1 emission from yourself first, because all these are in fact the product of others, which can get it from their scope 1 measurement. Now, up to this point, you might start to wonder, what's the difference between carbon footprint and life cycle assessment, right? you very often hear someone talk about them at the same time. But if they are the same thing, then why didn't someone just call a consistent name? The truth is carbon footprinting is only a subset of life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment basically assess the impact throughout entire life environmentally. So not only it can evaluate the carbon footprint, it could evaluate the water footprint as well, the waste footprint, the potential to deplete ozone, and so on. So there are many more impact categories, that's what we call in life cycle assessment. And carbon footprint is just one of it, which assess the global warming potential. And if you ever wonder how doing carbon footprint can help you reduce your carbon footprint, you're probably wondering the correct question, because it's very difficult. The way carbon footprinting is structured is intended for regulatory reporting. It's meant for you to report it to someone so that someone knows how you perform in terms of carbon footprint. It doesn't give you the insight on how you can actually improve it. In fact, if you remember what scope 1 is, it covers your entire factory activity. It doesn't break it down. So you have the overall greenhouse gas emission. So then what? Where exactly do you want to improve, and by how much? You know how much overall, but at where each part by how much is almost impossible to know, because the structure of carbon footprinting is just not meant for someone to know how to improve it, in fact. But on the other hand, if we do the carbon footprinting through life cycle assessment, it involves a little bit more process when we first calculating it, or to put it in specific, we need to break down the process flow in your company. So if you know this, for instance, here I'm still taking the blown fuel process that I showed just now. If you can break it down into a process, you will find out what kind of resource being consumed by each stage of this. Obviously, it's more work compared to just outright carbon footprinting. But what that enables you to do is add something we call a hotspot analysis. You can know exactly where this carbon footprint actually coming from which process. Like for instance, in this case, probably the highest would be, just my assumption here, I'm just simply attach a number here, just for demonstration. The largest probably coming from the extrusion, because it melt down the resin. So how can we reduce this part, the emission of it? So overall, it's a more holistic approach. And more importantly, it's not just for regulatory reporting. It actually gives an insight how you can improve your process. And on top of that, it's also a more robust framework. Because nowadays, we are talking about the global warming potential or carbon footprint. 10 years now from down the line now, probably we'll be talking about some other footprint, water management, waste generation, all these less spoken ESG risks. So someone at that, if let's say by then we already reduce our greenhouse gas sufficiently, someone will shift their attention to other type of sustainability effect. So at that point, do you want to start something overall over again? Probably no. You already invest a lot into footprinting either your carbon or water footprint. So having something more holistic from the beginning definitely is a more sustainable approach to tackle this kind of problem.
Hi, Dr. Chong, sorry to interrupt. Just want to remind you, you have 3 minutes left. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So what exactly do we need to collect for FCA if someone want to do it? There's only 2 things with it. First is the process flow, a very detailed process flow. In fact, I should say as detailed as we can, because how detailed we can break it down, it's going to affect how much insight we're going to look at. We can look at on the result itself later on. And once we can map out the process flow, the second thing we need to do is actually to assign number to all these input here. And that is exactly the second thing that we we're going to have, which is the input and output data for your company activity. And here I listed out for two very relevant industry to you guys. First is the blown film process, and the second is the plastic recycling, right? One is the manufacturing and the other is end of life treatment. So you may see there's a lot of similarity, but at the same time, a lot of difference between these two as well. For instance, the manufacturing definitely using probably virgin plastic resin. Some like Dongguan just now, they use a lot of recycled resin. That's good. So perhaps the recycling probably are consuming plastic waste instead. But one thing very common is everyone use electricity, everyone use water, everyone involved transportation, and everyone has waste as well. So these are all data that we need to collect in order for us to fill up here and come up with our own factor so that we can conduct a life cycle assessment. And exactly how we can do it, suppose, and how we will do in fact. And suppose, let's say we have three cell data from three different companies. And each of these, in fact, is essentially your carbon footprint. It allows it, we can get your carbon footprint out from here, but not quite. This is probably up until the scope of 2.5, some sort, because here, usually in the factor for LCA, the life cycle assessment, we don't take into the account of the employee transportation and your business trip and so on. So only those that are directly related to your production. And to make a factor out from the data from these three companies, all we need is in fact try to average it. And this average emission factor is something that will represent this particular industry, say the recycling industry. So it represents across the board in Malaysia because all these data are from the company of Malaysia. And this factor is in fact, if we call it factor here, this factor is in fact important to your downstream company because they will be relying on your product. Just like you will be relying on the factor from your upstream process, which is your supply chain. And just to give a better illustration how this cascade down from the upstream to you and also to your downstream, again, you are the plastic converter here, and this red column is the average factor that we managed to get just now. And this factor will be used for the downstream process. Say that if, let's say, you are a plastic bag manufacturer, your product will be used by a product manufacturer. They produce the product, use your plastic bag to package their food. Of course, at the same time, they're also relying on the food industry. And in the end, it goes to the recycler. And for the upstream, it's the same. Your input will be relying on the resin manufacturer, and their resin manufacturer is relying on the petroleum company. So everyone is relying on the factor of others. So you can't run away. And in LCA term, this is what we call from cradle to the grave, which is the end of life. And in between each company here, this is what we call the gate. So sometimes you may hear someone say cradle to gate. That's what exactly it means up until where the data actually represent the data set that you are talking about. And for plastic, hopefully it goes to a recycler rather than landfill. So in that case, we're just calling it another gate. And that's how we can trace the circularity as well. And once we get the factor, exactly what we're talking about here is how to improve carbon footprinting. So once we get the factor, how do we put into LCA software and use it? So next, I'm just going to show it very quickly, very briefly, how someone can do it. In fact, that's how we practice it as well. So first is once we get the average factor, we'll put into the LCA software. In this case here, I'm just taking one of the example of software that we are using. There are many more out there. So these two columns here, let's go through one by one. The first column here, you may see the input output. So this is exactly where we're going to key in the input data collected from your company and also the output. So for example, the average factor that we showed just now. And please don't read into the name here because these are just some random example that I'm showing here. But once we key in the input-output, it makes into a process. In fact, the hierarchy of a LCA model is split into the flow, which is all the raw material that we're seeing here, or the raw material used in your factory. The combination of flow make into a process, which is what we are trying to build here. For instance, a blown fuel process or recycling process. And last, the combination of many different processes make into a product. So that's how we LCA practitioners actually build an LCA model. And of course, you may see some funny names here, down here. You might recognize some of it. You've seen it just now. Also, we still need to use some predefined LCA database for us to provide us the essential flow, the smallest unit of a LCA model, so that we can build our own process on top of it. And just to give you an idea how the model will look like, this is one simple example. So imagine you are the plastic converter here. So you will be relying on the product of Gate 2 just now, which is the resin manufacturer, who is in turn relying on the petrochemical company. And those companies definitely are using the raw material as well. We call it the elementary flow. So they just need to be connected together. And you may see there's a mess here because that's correct. Some elementary flow are not just used by Gate 1, also Gate 2. Some even go to Gate 3. So which is why you hardly see a graphical illustration of how LCA model looks like, because it's very complex. But nonetheless, it's a holistic approach, like I said just now. So with LCA, the model can be configured very easily into a product analysis in future if someone need to. So in this case, here will be a product and here will present the process of the product. So we can switch it very easily as long as we have the factor. So it's overall definitely much easier process to work with. And just a quick one to show how the result will look like. This is exactly how the result page in the LCA software will look like. So again, different software might look differently, but all are the same. We need to know what kind of impact category we are choosing, because LCA can analyze more than just climate change. And it also can break down the environmental impact, in this case, the carbon footprint, according to the material and the process. So start from the overall carbon footprint, it can break down according to how we build the model, and also the different flow or raw material, the contribution by each of them. So all data is in just number, but it can be easily being exported for any post-process analysis. So what we really want to convince you here is we are here to help as well. So between us and Mpma, we are set to help the industry to calculate their carbon footprint. So by having our help, we can help you to calculate the indirect carbon emission, because the scope 1, obviously we need to measure from you, or you need to measure it. And the rest of it, scope 2 and scope 3 especially. So all that are calculations. So we are here to offer the help to you. And in the end of the day, not only you get all the scope carbon footprint that you need, but also because we're doing it in a life cycle assessment. So it allows you we can do a hotspot analysis for you to identify exactly where you need to improve. And we can start to think of how you want to improve it. And of course, your contribution will be beneficial for us as well, because by taking your scope 1 measurement, your direct measurement, it forms the factor for the downstream process. So essentially, we're talking about constructing the Malaysia factor database so that everyone can benefit, because remember, you also relying on your supply chain factor as well. So with that, I would like to end my presentation, right? So I hope that this definitely gives you more insight on carbon footprint, how do we actually do it? And most importantly, just want to deliver a message that we are here to help. So if you are interested in participate in the project that we are doing here, so you may contact the Mpma or me directly. And also you may also scan or click the link later on when you get the slide to register your interest in this project here to help us to carbon footprint the entire plastic industry. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chong. It was almost like going back to university, listening to you. Amazing. I'm sure a lot of us learned a lot of things. In fact, when yourself and Alvin was basically presenting, there was a lot of questions. In the past, usually we don't get a lot of questions, but this is one of the most active, I think, webinars I've ever come across. It's about 4:04 now. We are hoping to sort of end this in respect for the Ramadan week and all that. We like to end it at about 4:30 or so. But we have a fair bit of questions. So maybe I'll quickly start it off, Dr. and Alvin. The first question is, what parameters that you can monitor in a factory or process to show sustainability, and how do you do that? Dr. or Alvin, either one of us or both of you all can sort of respond to that. Thank you.
Chong, do you want to take that first?
Sorry, Mr. Jai, could you repeat the question
Okay,
again?
so the question is, what parameters that you can monitor in a factory or process to show sustainability, and how do you do that?
Okay, let me pull back my slide again. Sorry, just a quick one. So to answer that, it really depends on who are asking you that question. So if, let's say, someone in general, you're probably talking about all these, yes, someone is talking about ESG, then probably is this risk factor. So in a more layman term, it is about the kg CO2 equivalent. So this is a parameter that you can monitor. So this, in fact, gives the level of sustainability in terms of carbon footprint, the global warming potential.
And I suppose, Doctor, in order to do that, you got to have a framework, and that's exactly what you're trying to do, a framework specifically for the plastic industry. Yeah?
Exactly.
If not, you don't have a fallback, and you can't build that framework.
Yeah, exactly.
So ladies and gentlemen, that's all the more reason you got to help the particular project. Alvin, anything on your end?
No, I'll share that in the next question.
Okay, all right. So basically I'll drop to the other question. This is quite straightforward. Maybe Alvin can help out here as well. Are there any funding related to reduction of carbon footprint from the Malaysian government? I do not know of any, but is there any, Alvin? Do you know?
The GTFS,
Yeah, right.
You mentioned just now, there's a lot of loans for solar installing.
Yeah, there are loans. Yeah.
Solar panels. You get double tax. You get capital allowance reduction for under GTFS for solar panels, or even a My Hijau certified investment that you put in for your chillers, for all types of equipment that you put in. Other than that, I think the government at MIDA's end is also looking very actively at supporting companies that take initiative to reduce their carbon emission.
True, agreed. So those funding framework are available. I think particular question was more on specific grant or something, but anyway, there are tax breaks, there are loans available. Grants, there are, as far as I know, there are considerations within government agencies to look into not specifically with carbon footprint, but the whole spectrum of ESG compliance, getting certifications and so on. So that's something that Martin is also involved with, some funding agencies. So
from what I know, from what I know, in terms of grants, they are prioritizing companies that's investing on taking care of the ESG.
True. So there are both private sector funds and government funds, and there is also a lot in the conversation. I think a lot of agencies are looking at it, and hopefully something will come out in the next budget. The next question would be Dr. Cheong, how much contribution of solar panel manufacturer to carbon footprint? You have a general figure on this.
I don't have the concrete answer for that. What we are working on right now is also evaluating the carbon footprint for each of these renewable energy. So even though during operation, they don't emit CO2, but their manufacturing process itself do contribute. So generally speaking, it is much lower compared to fossil fuel in the order of, I would say 100, probably. The fossil fuel usually ranging about 1,000 kg CO2 per kilowatt hour. And for solar, most renewable energy is in the range of under 100. So it's an order of 10. Sorry. So it will definitely be better. But the exact number, we will come out very soon. Right.
So you're calculating sick. Thank you very much. The next question is, it goes, as a company that emits scope 3 emissions, how do we calculate our output instead?
Yep. And that is exactly where we need the contribution from A1, because that will relying on the factor of others. Just hang on, let me just bring it back again very quickly. So scope 3 involve all these items. So to put it simple, for us to know our scope 3, we need to know the factor of each of these, which obviously wouldn't be coming from yourself. It will be coming from this industry. So which is why LCA is something that takes everyone's contribution to really get it correct and accurate.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I would say, you know, it's easier, it's a low-hanging fruit to start with the scope 1 and scope 2. Scope 3 is a bit more complicated. As you move along, then maybe you can move on to scope 3.
Yep, definitely.
Thanks, Alvin. So basically, Alvin, you're saying scope 1 and scope 2 is still within the control of the company, and there is still a sort of a framework that allows you to start on the journey, right?
Yes, maybe I can share this. Basically, scope 1 and scope 2, you're looking at the reporting company itself, the product, the production plant, the company vehicles, the company facilities that is emitting the greenhouse gases. This is all within your scope of control. So it's measurable. For example, company vehicle, we know of if you subscribe to the Shell card, the Shell fleet card, they'll give you already a summary of the diesel use, the petrol that is being used by the company car, and the rest of it, and they will give you a factor on how to calculate it. Scope 2, electricity mainly, so that can be calculated quite easily. But moving to scope 3, wow, you're looking at your employees' energy consumption and all that. That's get a bit complicated, and that needs a bit more work. You know, your accounting people or those guys in charge of ESG is going to be a bit more competent. Yeah.
In fact, interestingly, there was a question along those lines. I'm just going to jump onto that quickly. Can employees' personal carbon footprint be included in scope 3?
Sure, definitely. The way they communicate to work.
All right. A bit of a technical question, Doctor. It goes like this: trees absorb carbon dioxide. Referring to what Dr. Cheong just showed, carbon dioxide equivalent is not just carbon dioxide. If products are made from trees and claim to be carbon reduction products, does that mean they are also carbon dioxide equivalent reduction products? Should I read that again?
Yeah. I think let me get it clearly.
So it goes like this: trees absorb carbon dioxide. Referring to what Dr. Cheong just showed, kilogram carbon dioxide equivalent is not just carbon dioxide. If products are made from trees and claim to be carbon reduction products, does that mean they are also carbon dioxide equivalent reduction products?
The trees absorb carbon dioxide during the photosynthesis process. That is at night.
Right. So it becomes a carbon sink.
During the day, they don't.
My answer to that is, if it's made from tree, then it is actually carbon positive, it's not negative, because we're actually taking out carbon sink. So the carbon footprint is definitely there. There's very rare occasion someone will consider a product from tree as carbon reduction is, for instance, they are using sustainable forest. It's a forest someone really planned just using to make into product. But generally,
I know of a friend who owns a huge timber concession, and he's selling, instead of chopping down all the trees, he's selling the carbon footprint. So he's making money every year.
Isn't it? And that's probably the best way for us to safeguard our forests. Right now there's a monetization model to holding on to your trees.
If someone can plant tree, then definitely it's a carbon reduction, yes.
I think USA is also sort of coming up with the carbon credit framework to facilitate and support that. So that's quite interesting. That brings us to the next question. Sort of, it says in other countries, US, EU, Singapore, carbon tax is imposed to businesses. I'm wondering when Malaysia will start carbon tax charge. Sorry, I think I got to take that. I think the government has announced it last year, sometime in September, I believe. The Prime Minister came out and said, you know what, we are going to impose a carbon tax. But I think they're still working on the mechanism of it. But I suppose inevitably every country would take the path. Some countries are faster. I think Singapore has already sort of looked into it and doing it. Malaysia is pledged it because it's under the RMK 12. That's one of the things that we are expected to do. Okay, so yeah, we sort of exhausted most of the questions. I've got a couple of questions, guys, if you don't mind. One is that there was a discussion, Elvid, you spoke about, you touched on design, and I thought it was very interesting. You started talking about product design. How much is product design ultimately, is it the way to go in order to, in a very sustainable way to reduce carbon footprint?
Yes, definitely. Now we're looking at, making the plastic packaging recyclable. For example, your potato chips packaging, your all are moving towards soft pack. Your pet food, even your detergent, your shampoos, the refills, your Milos, 3-in-1 coffees, they're all made from plastic packaging. And this plastic packaging is basically not recyclable, because there's too many family of plastic inside it. For example, the top layer is a PET layer, reverse printed, and the middle layer is probably a metallized CPP. It's not aluminum. You look at it, it's shining and all that. When you open a potato chips, it's actually not aluminum. Aluminum is very expensive. It's metallized CPP or metallized BOPP, or the sort is a metallized film, and the bottom layer is what we produce, the PE layer, polyethylene layer, which is contacting to the food, and it gives you a very easy sealing property. That's why we use it. So this three combination gives it a very good barrier against vapor, and also barrier against oxygen. The most important thing that keeps the goods fresh, all right, and extend the life of the products on the shelf. Okay, so now we are designing products to make it a mono material. For example, all these 2 or 3 layers are all made of PE material. So we're using a MDO PE to replace BOPP, for instance, or PET, for instance, to make it recyclable. And we are adding EVOH to the layer of PE to make to have that barrier against oxygen that the metallized film and all that provide. Thus, we will have the same property, but at the same time make it the film recyclable, for example.
See, so this goes to the heart of the issue, right? You are clearly putting a lot of resources into this sort of activities, yeah? Is it because you want to reduce costs, or do you think this will ultimately give you a better access to your buyers? What's your thought process here?
Well, we do what the customers want, because we are a profit-oriented organization.
So your buyers are asking; they're already pushing for it, right?
Yes, definitely. Because of the regulation changes, there's a lot of things that's happening. Yeah, especially in Europe.
So beyond Europe, because that's the other feeling, right? So a lot of SMEs could be thinking, "Look, my buyers are not in Europe, so why should I even bother?"
The local brand owners, it depends on their push, for example, the recycled content of the shrink film that we show you just now, we can add up to 50% of recycled content into the shrink film. I think one of the questions was asking just now, what is the content of recycled material that you can put in and all that. That depends on your source, I show you just now how we segregate our stuff, our recycle, the waste that we want to recycle, and how each grade has got to be separated accordingly, and that determines how much recycled material that you can put in, that you can load into the recycled content of the finished products. And also it depends on whether the end users are able to accept the level of mechanical properties and new parameters that come out from the recycled product. For example, gel count and all that. We do a lot of gel counts. Of course, gel count can be reduced by having quality recycled product inputted into it. And it's sensitive for products like shrink film and all that, which is packed by machine. You cannot have interventions onto it. If it's manually filled up by human and all that, you can seal it properly. You can see whether it's this one or not, and comply or not, then it's okay. But this is the machine running at 100 packs a minute and all that. So it depends on the acceptability of the end users. So the end users are mostly the brand owners, the likes of Nestle, Johnson & Johnson, Unilever, P&G, and all that. So it depends on their initiative, and they are pushed by the consumer as well as the government. Where if you see cat lying in the ocean and the fish eating it, they wouldn't want it, isn't it? So five things, yeah.
Turning things around, right? I mean, so you have your buyers pushing for you to do certain things. Do you do that as well? Is your procurement team trying to green its supply chain? Are you putting pressure on the ground?
Definitely, yes. We part of our ESG effort on our own part as well. We need to show, in our one annual report every year what we're doing. So part of it is these efforts. Yeah. So
do you engage your suppliers? I mean, are you telling them, look, you could be frozen out of my supply chain if you don't take this part? Is that a conversation
you're very much aware of it. Our suppliers are all big petrochemical companies. They are very much aware of these ESG issues. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Doctor, we're getting a question on trees again. It's interesting. Does planting more trees for our landscaping also eligible for reducing carbon footprint, similar like what Changi Airport is doing?
Fundamentally, yes, it will. It's definitely a way to reduce carbon footprint. And does it exactly contribute to your carbon footprint performance? Is the governing body has to certify that. So the governing body in Malaysia need to recognize like how many tree that you plant to help reduce how much the carbon emission.
In fact, in that context, right? What do you think? I mean, moving forward, right? What do you think? I mean, both of you, if there's something can be done on a government level. I mean, I'm putting the government on the spot right here. But what do you think the government should do? One, two, what should you think the industry should do? If there's one single thing as to move the needle.
For me, Mpma has been advocating don't be a litter bug campaign. So don't litter, basically, because for plastic packaging, plastic products, everything is recyclable. So management of that is very important. To reduce this carbon footprint, to reduce the consumption of petrochemical products and all that, we need to recycle the product, and by segregating your waste, by managing your waste correctly, that helps a lot.
And you had a recycling plant, right? I mean, it was so you are really looking at your own internal waste production, and you're sort of doing a.
We are driven mostly by profit, basically. The recycling is basically your waste, you recycle it and you use it again. It's, if you can load 50% onto it, then, it's a lot of savings. Yeah.
So it's not a cost, it's an investment, right? So whatever you are doing.
Yeah.
Right. you. Doctor, in your context?
And I think what Mr. Elvin says is very correct. In the end, all companies are looking at profit. So doing something, it must bring profit, then only someone will do. So I think I saw quite a lot of people talking about carbon tax in the chat column. So I think that's one thing that the government can do to push this whole thing. After all, if there's a tax exemption they can get by being sustainable, definitely some more people will do it on top of the benefit they can get from their market.
So a bit of push from all ends. We have also got a couple of questions on monoplastic. So the question is monoplastic pouches are already available in market?
Yes, it's coming up in Europe. Locally, it depends on the push from the brand owners. If the consumers push them harder, then it is faster. If you don't push them, you don't pressure them, they would go their own way, because mono material is definitely today more expensive than conventional materials. Yeah.
So
it depends on whether they're willing to pay for it.
Yes, true enough. Now, the thing I was interested with your presentation, Elvin, one of the things that came out very strongly is that it is, how should I say, it's coming from your top management, right? A lot of times we tend to see sometimes the changes in ESG compliance and all that. It happens at the factory floor, little things happen and all that. They don't seem to have tidied up to a strategic intent in terms of remaking your revenue model or having a major impact. If there's an advice you can give to SMEs, what would that be? How do they start this journey? Do they start with a gap analysis, perhaps, and then move on to a capacity building program, make their top management understand the urgency and importance of it? How does the journey start?
I think do the simple things first. For example, the scope 1 and scope 2 things, you need to analyze your carbon footprint. You start with that. Installing solar panels and all that, while the incentives are still there, it helps a lot. And it gets you moving, basically from one step to the next, to the next. So it's sort of a process. You got to start it, and the flow will go on gradually.
So start with scope 1, scope 2. And Doctor, I remember you mentioned that, well, carbon footprint is basically just one component of life cycle assessment, right? What are the other components that, maybe the company should be aware
of? I do prepare for that.
Okay, fair enough. Right. But that definitely it's a big journey. And I think, yeah. There you go.
So here we go. Yeah. So there are many more impact category actually. Some one can look at, but I would say at this point, like Elvin said, start small. Climate change is the most important one right now. So let's tackle this first. Then we'll think about the other.
Because it's true, right? Because a lot of people tend to think that you have to do everything immediately, and it's too expensive. And people get complicated and worried, right? So the messaging here is start small, focus on perhaps your scope 1 and scope 2 first. And there are already, even from a government perspective, there are already a reasonable amount of financial support structure for you to go into the scope 1, scope 2 process, right? And manage that. The other component that usually is not really given due priority that maybe it should is storytelling, right? So if you do something, and Elvin, you were mentioning about Nestle just now, right? So they went and did a big splash of salt. I guess Tongguan is big and don't necessarily need that splash, right? But is that something that is maybe underplayed? Maybe you got to do something and you got to talk about it, and then you feel good about it, and then you attract attention, and that could maybe transform and translate into some business. Is that something that to be looked at?
We don't like to do it, we like to stay low profile, but in this time and age, you will have to somehow expose yourself. So you come to a point whereby you probably don't have a choice because that drives your competitive advantage.
Right. All right. So thank you, Elvin. Doctor, there's another question here. It says, we are manufacturing eco-friendly detergent without SLES, how can we best calculate our carbon footprint for the product itself, or can it be part of the LCA?
Definitely, LCA can calculate the carbon footprint for the product. So it's just a matter of what kind of raw material you're using, and then in the end, what is the corresponding carbon footprint of it.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I'm going to take one last question, and then it'll come to an end. The question is, in oil and gas or chemical, we limit the project boundaries in order to demonstrate the carbon footprint to regulatory. Don't jump into produce scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, or maybe it's just a comment, I think. Okay, so maybe I will ask one last question. If there's one message that you can give to an SME in terms of maintaining, leveraging on carbon footprint to their export competitiveness, what would that be?
Be aware of what is going on in the environment, that what is going on basically by attending Mpma's webinar.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Dr. Cho, what about maybe a final word for you on the study that you're doing and study that MPA is doing? How critical is that for the industry?
I would say very, because from here onward, we're going to hear about carbon footprint for very long. In fact, until 2050, we'll still hear about it. And it's just going to be more and more. So start the calculation, right? You can join us as well. We do help to collect from everyone, then try to analyze for the entire industry. So start first, start small. First step, definitely always know your baseline, where you are. Then you know how much you need to improve.
Wonderful. With that, thank you very much, Alvin and Dr. Cheong, for your sharing. It has been tremendous learning for, I think, all of us. And we sincerely hope that the industry will move forward with the vision that has been articulated so well by the Mpma management. With that, thank you very much. And I'd like to now hand it over back to Ms. Shalini. Thank you.
A big thank you to Mr. Jai Shankar for moderating and speaking at our webinar today, and to Mr. Alvin Ng and Dr. Cheong for the very valuable sharing. It's been very insightful today. And to all participants, we hope the webinar today has been beneficial to you and sparks the urgency for you to embark on this sustainability journey. Mpma is ready to assist you in this journey, specifically on carbon footprint, and we do look forward to seeing your registration with us. Thank you. Have a nice evening and take care.